speaking of the team that probably is going to have to face Ohio State twice. Joe, we continue on our deep dives. We go to Eugene, Oregon, a team that we talked about last night about how good Dan Lanning is recruiting. Joe, first year in the Big Ten, a big transition for any program to have to go through. Why do I feel like Oregon is one of the top 2 teams in all of the Big Ten this year?
Yeah, this is where I know we're all hyped up on Ohio State from that segment. They're the second best team in the Big Ten. I know that feels like we're kind of shortchanging them a little bit because I feel how much we talked about them and hyped them up yesterday and how much Oregon fans are excited for their first year in the Big Ten. They're the second best team in the conference. I don't see, and I think this is the last Big Ten preview, there's not really any competition for them for that second spot. And they also, just like Ohio State, have a really favorable schedule. But it shouldn't be a hot take to say that. Who would compete with them? Seriously, like who would Penn State maybe, who we're not super juiced up about, who the heck would compete with them?
I think Penn State, if you're talking about a team like, hey, well, welcome to the Big Ten. I mean, you can't sleep on Penn State. Maybe, like those kinds of things that happen, right? Like, hey, Penn State comes in, they're more physical, kind of shocks Oregon that all of the cliches.
Yeah.
However, dude, I just think that I think Dan Lanning's a really good coach, and I honestly believe that they have a lot of freaking talent. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation about Dylan Gabriel. Joe, what conversations? I don't think Oklahoma should have ran him off, personally.
I agree with that. I
thought it was the dumbest thing for them to do was to run him off. But it's just the level of dudes that they added around it. Evan Stewart, Jabbar Muhammad, Derek Harmon, and Jamari Caldwell, just like those dudes alone. Okay, like even taking out Dante Moore, who is going to be a very talented quarterback. They continue to recruit at a high level, portal, high school, which I think is going to bode well for them. I do have some question marks on them, and look, when you compare, so we just picked Ohio State to win the Big Ten, and why we think Oregon's at 2 is because you have to find those fine lines for teams like this. I do think that there are question marks with them defensively, even though Dan Lanning is a really damn strong defensive coach. Joe, they have 4 new dudes in the defensive backfield. Jabbar Muhammad, Kobe Savage, Braden Johnson, and Cam Alexander are all going to be starters for them potentially, and they're coming back. That's a whole new secondary that you have to break into your system. So I just look at them and say, look, I think you're talented offensive line, defensive line. I think you added 2 really good interior defensive tackles from the portal that can play now. Maybe that takes some pressure off of Jordan Birch. I know that they have elite talent in their secondary. Like, I very much love Jabbar Muhammad from Washington. The playoffs alone, he was ridiculous against Texas. He was the one who knocked the ball away against A.D. Mitchell.
Yeah.
I just don't know if they can hold off Ohio State. Now, the question that this instantly becomes to, Joe, number one, are they used to the week-to-week physicality, which I do think that they are, that you would get in the Big Ten? But number 2, that game against Ohio State's in Eugene, though, man. And that place at night could be very loud. So I just asked the question.
Is it a night game? Or I don't even know if that's been.
I don't even know if it's a night game. Forget if it even is a night game. Now, let's just say it's not at night. But on the West Coast, it's not going to be an 11 a.m. game, I wouldn't imagine.
No, it'll probably be
a 2:30 game, like a big-time matchup here.
Yeah, it'll probably be an afternoon game.
All I am saying is that I do think that you could have a situation here where they could split, and then things start really becoming interesting. Here's the final line for me. Even if you replicated exactly what you did last year and you lose to Ohio State twice for whatever happens, so what? You're going to be in the playoffs, and quite honestly, you're just as talented as any other team from 5 through 12 that you're going to face. It's like they're going to be favored, Joe, arguably I mean, I don't know who they wouldn't be favored in the playoff. Maybe Georgia, Ohio State. I mean, they might be the third best team in the nation, but they might be the second best team in their conference.
So the way that I look at this with them, you hit all the descriptors for this roster. There's very rarely can we feel confident about a new quarterback stepping in and not really thinking there's much concern on if they're capable or not. I've said this continuously.
We saw Dylan Gabriel do it twice, though.
I really think that right, he's done it multiple times. Dylan Gabriel is the perfect quarterback for the system. I think that there's a legitimate shot. Him and Will Stein connect so effectively, and Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart are so productive that he ends up being a Heisman finalist when it's all said and done. I love their tackles, and the offensive line that they have is very stout. Their running back room is really underrated, by the way. They have got this one kid, Jay Harris, who's like a Division II, Division III player who really caught my eye during the spring game, and talked to somebody about him, and it sounds like there's a potential he could be a real spark plug for that offense. He's listed as the third running back right now. I really think that despite them being the second best team in their conference, they, to me, look like they'll be the best unseeded team in the playoff. They look like that they can be the best. Will they be a 6 seed?
A 5 seed.
Yeah. I really think that even if they don't win the Big Ten and they lose to Ohio State twice, that is not an indictment of how good this team is. And that's where Oregon can really flourish in these situations of the future of college football. They've always been, when they weren't in the playoff, the many years that they were in it a couple of times, they were always right on the outside. They were always really gifted and really talented. And I think that they could seriously benefit from the challenges of having to play Ohio State twice and then being battle tested to go up against whoever they might have to end up facing. So that they really end up landing in a position where they could do some damage. They could end up being one of the last 4 teams remaining just because they got a foot in the door and they know how to go toe-to-toe because they did it twice against Ohio State.
I think if their secondary wasn't filled with a lot of transfer portal guys, but see, here's the thing. I'm going to contradict myself in this. I know that I am. Joe, I think they got really talented dudes at the DB position. But, Joe, when you have 4 of them, I mean, you start talking about that cohesion, that word continues to come up in all of these deep dives because of just how the portal is. But, God, man, Jabbar Muhammad is really good. Kobe Savage, really good. Braden Johnson might be that nickelback, and Cam Alexander. But, I flip it to the other side. Joe, you know what I'm noticing in all these? I don't know. This might be the year of the wide receiver in the draft, if I'm being honest, if you think about it. I'm going to another position group with Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, 2 guys that could be 1,000-yard receivers. I mean, Tez Johnson was a year ago. He was a 1,200-yard receiver, double-digit touchdowns. Joe, is Oregon now the best receiver unit in the country? I mean, like, Evan Stewart's a dude. Tez Johnson's a dude. Oh, and by the way, Trey, the Holden kid, I know that he only didn't have 500 yards, but 6 big TDs in crucial situations. Jordan James comes back, by the way, and had double-digit touchdowns there too. Man, this is going to be a really good unit in what they utilize, man.
I think that, yeah, if we were to come up with who the best duo is at receiver right now, I think that Oregon does end up fitting that billing because of like
they would be in the top 3.
That's
my point. Like, hey, man, you're going up against this is going to be the talk for me when we get to Oregon and Ohio State. Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart versus Burke and Downs.
Yeah, you've got a former 5-star and you've got one of the most underrated receivers.
Aren't all of them former 5-stars?
Tez Johnson's not a former 5-star.
Okay.
Evan Stewart obviously was a former 5-star. But you brought up the secondary a second ago. That's the one position group I'm a little bit unsure of. Not that I don't think that they can't be really good in their secondary, because the guys that they brought in were all pretty gifted. They were all pretty important players for their teams last year. Their defensive line's really freaking stout. Jordan Birch, and one player to watch, Mateo Uyunglele, DJU's little brother,
correct,
is a house. That kid is tough. He is physical. There's a real shot that he could explode onto the scene this year. He's projected to start right now as a true sophomore, and he got a ton of reps last year. But right now we are projected at both corner spots, at nickel and at safety, to have transfers coming in. It's not that I don't think that this group will be good, but as we have brought up with a lot of these teams, and as you have alluded to a second ago, it does need to be said that when you have this many dudes in a position group, one that requires a ton of communication, that requires a ton of awareness and feel for understanding of where everybody is. We're not talking about one corner and one safety or two safeties and the corners are returning. All of these guys are all new coming from somewhere else. The only guy that's coming back is Tysheem Johnson. That is the only guy that's returning coming back.
And look, he was one of their leading tacklers last year. He had 70 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, and 2 picks. I mean, Joe, could he be the anchor? Now, here's the question that I keep having in the back of my mind. Does that radio in the helmet help for a brand new unit where you can get things aligned? So, look, we'll see. I am pretty high on Oregon here, though, in reference to what all they've built there. Let me ask you the ultimate question here. What's going to be said about Dan Lanning if he doesn't win the Big Ten?
So I don't think,
because now
there is going to be heavy.
Let me put some context on this. Did you see today, now that everybody's comparing him to Kirby, everybody's like, stop comparing him. Like, it's all over social media today too. And I'm like, I don't know about all that.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, all over.
I didn't end up catching that.
Mm-hmm.
The thing with, if Dan Lanning doesn't win the Big Ten in his first year in the conference, I think there's going to be heavy overreaction to it. I really do think that there is going to be aggressive overreaction where everyone's going to start playing the game of, and I brought this up when we were talking Ohio State. Can Dan Lanning win the big game? That's what's going to get brought up. Is he just a guy who's going to put together really good rosters and just fall short every single year? Kirby Smart, it took him time. We're talking about year 3 and unbelievable recruiting success that he's had. I don't think that Dan Lanning, there is not the same amount of pressure on Dan Lanning as there is on Ryan Day right now. Dan Lanning does not need to win the Big Ten. He does not need to beat Ohio State even once for me to feel like he is pushing this program forward in the right direction. I think that Oregon fans certainly would be disappointed based on the way that they've reacted to in a lot of our comments. I think a lot of them think that they deserve legitimacy in the national championship conversation. And I'd argue that they might be the 3rd or 4th best team in the country right now. But we need to realize that with Kirby, who we compared him to yesterday, he had a lot of time. It wasn't an immediate right away thing. It was season after season of improving. He got to the
national championship in year 2, though. Or year 2 or year 3, I think. Yeah, he played Alabama. Remember the Devonta Smith in the back of the end zone?
I don't think it was that soon. Wait.
Yeah, I think it was that soon.
But before he won one, though, it still took him time before he was able to get there.
Yeah,
it wasn't
7 years.
Wait, how do I pull up
his record? I'm pretty sure
his year by year. So 2016.
Yeah, 2017 they played for a national title.
Why is Wikipedia so goddamn hard to read? Jesus Christ.
Either way, Georgia fans, if you're in here, let us know. I see one. Either to your point, Joe, when you talk about that,
they did the second year. They lost. Yeah,
to Alabama, Devonta Smith game.
Yeah.
I do say this, Joe, and I don't want to get this. I don't want to say that their secondary isn't extremely talented. Joe, they brought in 4 really good players to be in their secondary. I just asked the question. Like, Joe, we didn't even talk about Jeremiah Smith in the Ohio State deep dive that we did. Like, that's not a fun unit to go up against. Can Kyle McCord get him the football is going to be a big question, too. So, I mean, there are question marks that need to be answered, and I think that Oregon is right there knocking on the door. When it comes to Dan, okay, I just don't think it's fair to say if he loses to what everybody has said might be one of the best rosters ever. I don't find that as a slight. Let me just say this too. I need more production. If we're talking about Oregon and defense, I need more production from Jordan Burch. 3 sacks is not enough to be the guy that you're projected to be.
I mean, to be very blunt, I think he's been a player who's been a bit overhyped throughout his recruitment and his college
just
career.
Not there, and that's the biggest thing is that he doesn't. I mean, 3 sacks, okay, is not anything to sneeze at. However, it's like you need more. Now, they do bring in Caldwell along the defensive line from Houston. They bring in Derek Harmon from Michigan State. A lot of people wanted Derek Harmon. He goes to Oregon. I don't know how much that helps Jordan Birch, but when you add really quality defensive linemen, everything helps.
Well, they also lost Brandon Dorlus to the draft this past year, who was a guy that I really liked when I was doing, scouting for the 2024 class, and it was grading and ranking those guys. But I'm not really worried about his production because I just don't know if he's ever going to really get to where everyone thought he was supposed to be. He's just one of those dudes that's really physically gifted, but doesn't totally actualize it. I'm not trying to knock him too much, but the production kind of proves my point where he hasn't really brought it to fruition. It's in there somewhere. I'm really a lot higher on Uiagalelei, man. I really think that kid is going to turn some heads once he gets into a rhythm. He might be the real one. Jordan Birch might be taking attention away for everyone saying that, oh, here's this returning senior. We need to keep an eye on him. We need to maybe hit him with a double team, whatever it might be. But I really think that DJ Uiagalelei is going to be a badass MFer in the Big Ten.
DJ.
Sorry, Mateo. DJ's not a badass. Mateo's a badass.
I mean, I don't think you would square up against DJ at a bar.
He's a bit, no, I'm 5'11". Hell no. No, obviously not. Part of me wonders if what would happen if DJU was playing defensive end like his brother. Who knows what his career would have been like? But
I told you this story. A good buddy of mine works for the Dodgers. He's in their front office.
Mm-hmm.
The last pick in the MLB draft last year. Do you know who the player was?
It was DJU.
It was DJU. They took him, and I asked the scout. I'm like, "Why do you take him?" He goes, "Listen, I don't need him to be highly accurate, but basically what he was saying, did you see him run against really good athletes? Like the dude was a really good baseball player and they drafted him. They hoped he would have signed, but he didn't. I don't know if they don't do it again and give him options."
Yeah.
Just
hilarious. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.